Yep, you're sharing your screen. Yep. Yay. All right, we got claps. Cool. All right. Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining online and in person. Trying out this hybrid event for the first time. But it's at least moderately successful. So thank you again for those of you online. This is the February 2022 installment of the Houston Java User Group meeting. You'll probably see that there is some weird camera. It's called an OWL camera. We've got it through Improving's been a generous sponsor for this meeting. Sponsored the pizza and the online hosting and all sorts of great stuff. And Claudio is going to tell us all about testing in Agile tonight. And also a quick note, Improving is hiring Java developers right now. So if you're interested, please feel free to reach out to me. Drop a note in the chat, let me know, or email me, or contact me on LinkedIn and let me know. It's a great place to work for. And everybody here is just really amazing to work with. It's an amazing culture. And I just can't dream of working anywhere else. So I don't know what else there is to say. It's been voted a great place to work for many times in a row. So yeah, what else is there to say about Improving, Claudio?
It's just freaking awesome. What else do we have to
say? What else do you have to say? Yeah.
I've been with the company for almost 6 years. Does that say anything? Almost like my longest running. I'm trying to beat my previous record, which was 8.5 years with the company. Okay. And I know it will be pretty easy to do.
Cool.
Here.
Awesome. Great. Thanks so much. Claudio, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. Appreciate it. Whew. I had to go run for my adapter because I didn't even realize that I was not plugged into the monitors. It's been a long day. Well, this is a talk. It's one of my favorite talks that I think I created maybe 3 years ago or so. And I've been giving it ever since. And it's a fun talk for me because I've given it for developers, for QA folks, for BAs, for product owners. I just changed my spiel. Depending on the crowd, I'm going to talk more technical, less technical, but it appeals to very diverse crowds. Catching my breath here, sorry. So I'm Claudio Lassala. You have my email up there on the screen. I always put it out because if after the talk, you spend a couple of days thinking about hopefully some of the topics that we're discussing here, and you come up with questions or concerns, or maybe you're trying some of this on your own, and then you have questions, please reach out. I'm always looking forward to hearing from folks who have tried some of the things that I put out and have experienced some things, and I use that feedback to improve my own skills on this area. I always put up my business card, as you can see, my areas of passion there, very diverse. It's not just your regular sitting at the keyboard and programming. I do way more than that. That's why I add some photos of the stuff that I do that are not technical, that's not programming, to show people that yes, there is life outside of ones and zeros, right? So reach out. If you see anything there that spikes your interest, just reach out. This talk, the way it came out is that, as with most developers, for me, testing used to be an afterthought. Right? As a developer, it's just so exciting to write code. That's what I wanted to do, to write code. And eventually you have to see, oh, hey, does it compile? Yes. Does it work? Oh, it has to work? Oh, yeah. So then you test. Right? Then we start doing just manual tests. Okay? I've learned of practices around automated testing and TDD, BDD. There are so many variants there. And going through those practices, I've realized, I felt, and I've been told that, I've become a better developer since I started to really incorporate those techniques as part of the work that I do. It allowed me to write better code. But last but not least, the single most important for me that came out of these practices is that it has taught me to interact more and better with non-technical people. That's been the mind blowing thing, right? Because as a technical person, it's very easy to isolate just within, you know, a group of us coders and only talk the technical stuff. And when it comes to articulating with the non-technical folks, we choke. It's like, well, we don't know how to explain things outside of our technical jargons and the things that we do as developers. It's like, you may ask, well, through testing, you've learned to better interact with non-technical people. How did that work? Well, I'll go over what that looked like for me, because it was not something that happened, you know, overnight. It took me years to actually go through different variations of the practice to develop these skills. So as I was saying in the beginning, for me, there was manual testing, right? I come from way before Windows XP, but I couldn't find some good DOS screenshots to use. But back in the day, it was, okay, you compile the app, you run it, and then you go through the splash screen. Do you guys remember splash screen? You guys are old enough to remember that, right? So you would wait for the splash screen, and then the login would come in. You would have to type your credentials, username and password, get them wrong at least 2 or 3 times until you actually got the right one in. And then you would go past that. You would be presented with a menu, not as nice as this one, but one of those that's like, file, this thing, this thing, this thing, this thing, and then you would hit just the wrong pixel, the whole menu would collapse, and you had to start all over to get to the one feature that you wanted to test. To then click on some text boxes, put some data, hit some buttons, and wait for the outcome to see, hey, did it work? Does it do what I was writing the code to? Well, that kind of gets old very quickly. If you have to every time go through this entire cycle to get back to the thing that you're trying to test. So at some point we started learning about doing some sort of automation in our testing as we learned to like get some stuff out of the UI, some code out of the UI that we are creating. So now that you have some coding like this non-visual representations of code, you could just create a little console app, right? Run the console app and at least say, yay, or nope, it didn't work. Whatever the case might be, the shortest path to the thing that you are trying to test. So we started writing some console apps to exercise some of the code that we were writing. Then sometime back in 2004 or 5, I was in Canada, and there was this talk there, this session about like an intro to unit tests. I had never heard of unit tests, so I said, okay, let me go and learn about unit tests, right? And then I've learned that, okay, all we need is something that looks somewhat like this. Yes, this is a C#, but I think it looks just similar enough to Java for you guys to relate somehow. But I've learned that, okay, those classes or those bits of code that I was writing as console apps, okay, this is kind of similar, right? It's the same thing. You're writing code to test code, except that you're applying some attributes to a class or to a method to tell a test runner, right? A test framework to inform a test runner to execute this for you in a consistent manner. But okay, that sounds pretty cool. So we learn how to use test frameworks, how the test runners work, how we can incorporate those in automated builds and all that kind of fun stuff. We learned that, yes, we are always instantiating objects, setting some properties, and then we're calling methods, and then we're asserting on the results. Somebody came up with this formula, the arrange, act, assert. Every time you write automated tests, you're always following the same pattern, arrange, act, assert, the AAA, right? So we all learn a little bit of this here and there, day one in writing automated tests. It takes no time for you to get the fever of writing tests. And then you start looking at code coverage, right? And then you let code coverage drive you, right? You start running the code coverage tools and the reports to see, okay, what bits of my code is not under test? And then we start the search for the holy grail, right? 100% code coverage. Otherwise, I'm not gonna, accept your pull request. But oh, wait a minute. But do we also consider property setters and getters in that? do we really test 100% of everything? Well, no, there are cases where it's not applicable, so we're gonna relax the rule. So it's like 92.5% is what we're aiming for. So people start like creating these weird percentages as to what's acceptable. And if somebody's trying to commit some code into source control that does not have 92.75% code coverage, they, reject your pull request. Well, and then, okay, somebody puts a policy like that in place, and then you find people writing tests that have no assertions, right? And then, of course, those tests have like 2,000 lines of code, right? 1,600 are just like mocks and stubs, like setting stuff up, and then calls into something, and then you get to the bottom, like, where is the the assertions, right? You ask people, it's like, oh, it's because we have a policy that tells us that we need this amount of code coverage. So as long as the code does not throw exceptions, at least we satisfy that policy. Yeah, well, that's not really what you should be writing tests for.
Baloney. It's baloney.
Right? So I have a whole like blog post about how I use code coverage. It has nothing to do with satisfying somebody's policies, on check-in. It's okay. You have a legacy code base that's you want to make changes to it. Well, okay, write some tests and get as much of that under tests so that you can start safely making changes to it. That's how we're supposed to be using code coverage. Beyond that, like if they're just numbers, they're meaningless. But it took me a while to have that realization, right? Also, unit tests, or what I thought were unit testing, quickly became integration tests. Right? I remember to this day, the first like big project that I started writing unit tests for, I had like maybe 300 tests, and I'm all happy that's like, oh man, I'm testing everything that people are going to be using. That's great and all. I push that and I tell the other developers on the team, hey, you can just, pull latest on the source code and you're going to get all these tests. They run the tests and about, I don't know, maybe 45, 50% of them fail. Say, well, but it has the stamp. It works on my machine. How come it doesn't work on yours, right? Then I learned that in order to run those tests, they needed a SQL Server database and the proper connection strings and the proper tables and the proper columns. Oh, then I learned about integration tests. Okay, they're still useful. At some point, you do want to see how things integrate, right? But they're not unit tests. You have to understand what unit tests are, what integration tests are, the prices that you pay on each one of those, and then use them accordingly. Another problem that I fell into is everybody falls into it. Oh, that's just test code. So the quality of the test code is very poor. And that grabs me the wrong way after so many years in the following sense. The whole like AAA arrange act cert, that's what I've been calling the training wheels of automated testing. That's how you get started. Write your arrange, write your act, assert, right? You get started and you do that in day 1, 2, 3. After a month, 3 months, a year of doing that, you should probably evolve out of it, because what happens when we just follow that, we end up with tests. And here I've been very generous on this test sample that I got out in the wild at a previous gig, where I needed to find something that would fit in a screen and people could actually read. Because in the wild, this is way worse, right? Where that range part, it's like, okay, I can see that there's some mocking happening. There's an interface that's being mocked, and there's a method on that interface that's being mocked to say, I don't care what parameters get passed in, you always return true. Okay, I can read that. Right? I can read that in C#. I can probably read that in Java. I imagine that it looks very similar, right? And then you have some more stubs that you're setting, and then there's another method from another interface that you're mocking to return that stub. And then there's a controller where you're passing in the dependencies, and then eventually you're calling that method and then you're asserting on it, right? So from a technical perspective, I can read that and understand that. What I cannot infer from reading the code is, why does it matter? Why is it that we're testing the portfolio's controller and you're having to mock this iPortfolio service? Okay, I can kind of get that, but what about the claims identity? And what is this first parameter that's a string? What does that represent? And what does it mean to return a true, right? What if I were to return a false? What does that mean? No idea, right? I'm just reading primitives at that point. True, false, integers. They don't tell me a thing. And then what happens with that? Well, every single line of code that we write, it's bound to be copied, right? As soon as somebody joins the team, or even yourself, you're going to work on a new feature that's similar to one that you wrote in the past, you're going to find the closest code to that so that you can copy, paste, and just change what's different. That's what we all do, right? Let's recognize that.
Let's just copy it off Stack Overflow.
Right. That's right. Stack Overflow driven development, right? That's what happens. So, of course, if you have tests that go for like hundreds of lines of code, it will get copied. So all of those mocks that return true or false, you're going to have to read through them. And if they are just a copy and paste, maybe it's a true or false that they've changed, you're going to have to read through it. And you're going to have to be like scrolling up and it's like, what's the difference between these 5 or 6 or dozen tests in the class? It takes a lot of brain power to see, oh, there's a true that's different here. Or there's an exclamation mark to negate the thing. And it's like, I'm busy with the business concepts in my mind, but now I'm having to parse through all these programming gobbledygook that means really nothing when we're actually discussing with other humans, right? So those things, like, yeah, we need to do something better than that. After I've gone through like, that was like several months, if not like a year or two later, when I started learning about the STAR-DD, right? Test-driven development or test-driven design, depending on how you approach it. Behavior-driven development, domain-driven design. Those all like came around at the same time when I was learning about all these things. At some point, folks might say, oh, I'm not doing TDD anymore. I'm only doing BDD now. Oh, wait a minute. You're not really learning about what these practices are, because you should really be using them in conjunction, right? With behavior-driven development, you describe the behavior needed for the business, right? With TDD, test-driven design, you describe the code you would like to have when you're done implementing that behavior. So they go hand in hand. It pretty much changed the way I think, right? As I've gone from unit tests to integration tests, to then start like around the same time, understand about the solid principles and, dependency inversion principles, single responsibility, all that stuff, start refactoring your code towards those patterns, and then thinking about how do I actually write my tests? Because at first, I was writing like most people would write, like with long sentences, like withdrawing money should decrease balance by amount, the name of the thing, right? That's how actually that was already an evolution, right? Because on the start, it was test 1, test 2, test 3, test 4, or test sum, test, minus, test, that was it. Then we went with, okay, let's talk about the operation and the should, what's expected out of this feature. But then it came to the realization that, why are we conforming with the design guidelines, in this case for C#, I believe for Java is similar.
Yeah.
The way to write methods like that. Like, why are we conforming with that? Because I don't know about you guys, the spoken language that has been the hardest one for me to learn is German. Because you have a word that looks like a full sentence where the words are just combined. So it's very hard for me to learn. And when I see methods like that in tests, it's kind of hard for me to actually see the boundaries of the concepts that I'm trying to read. So I started separating those, like a lot of people out there have been doing, like just put some underscores under the word so you can see the word boundaries more clearly. And once we got to that point, it's like, well, make the whole thing lowercase, right? It's a sentence. Oh, but that violates the C# rules. Yeah, right? Because here I'm using, in this case, C# or in whichever programming language I'm using, I'm following this format because this is not implementation code of the feature. This is a spec describing the behavior that I'm building. This is how I'm using C# with that intent of describing feature. From there, I started using casing to draw the reader's attention to what's important. So like in this case here, I read withdrawing decrease. Yeah, withdrawing decrease. The brain does not even have to process the little characters there. If the method was called withdrawing increase, the brain goes like, whoa, that's wrong. It would force you to read between the lines, so to say. So I started using in my tests. No, I do not write like methods in my regular class, the production implementation in that manner. Only in tests, I use it with that intent. So that as people is trying to learn about the system that they are working with, they start from the test. Somebody asked me, you know, what does this application do? How does this module work? Go read the tests. You're going to read specs that read as close to English as we can, right? And then you can read about the main things. You want to see the actual implementation? Just hit the shortcut that goes to implementation, right? And you navigate around your code base like that. So that was a big thing for me because, again, it made me stop, slow down, take a step back and think, what are the words I'm trying to find here? Do my tests describe the behavior that we're trying to implement, right? And at that point, I'm not thinking, does this lambda expression make sense? Do these primitives make sense? Does this API or this library? It's like, no, I'm not thinking about the technical stuff. Because I just had a conversation with my product owner, with my BA. We were speaking English, describing business things. As I look at my specs, not tests, specs, it closely relates to that. I don't have that mental parsing to go between one thing to another. It's the same thing like my mother language is Portuguese. If I have to communicate where I have, okay, English here, Portuguese here, there's a lot of parsing that happens in my mind to be able to streamline that conversation. It's very hard. Why don't we apply that same understanding between English and the programming languages that we're using, right? Try to, you know, smoothen out this communication and collaboration between the parts. Any questions so far? Sorry, I get very passionate about this, just machine gunning everybody.
No questions from the chat either, but yeah, folks, if you have questions in the chat, feel free to type them in. I'll moderate. So Scott is actually typing something right now, so.
Okay.
Yeah, give me just a second. Yeah.
Get some water.
Yep. And folks in the room, make sure I get you the URL for the door prize link for the door prize survey. So Scott says, I like the snake case with the highlighted words. Cool.
Excellent.
And he's big on refactoring, so he's
outstanding.
Yeah.
Outstanding. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's you know, I always get some mixed feelings from some folks when I show like C# code, in this case written like this, that folks say, oh man, I don't like that. It looks like Ruby, right? It's like, well, yeah, you got a point. That's where I've learned this kind of stuff. It's when I was, you know, in Ruby land, said, okay, this makes sense. Why are we not doing that?
Yeah. Dan Sline says, what about naming where tools like Jane can put custom text in the annotations?
Okay. Hey, Dan, by the way, long time no see, man. So yes, that's a question that also comes up because I don't, maybe in another slide I have that, because the body of the tests, actually, I may be able to pull that because I came prepared. Let me show an example here. From this slide, let me go big. Slideshow. From current slide. When you look at oh, that's not the one I would like this guy to show.
I hate it when that happens.
Yeah, what was the trick to make it?
Swap screens or something?
Yeah, slides.
Hide presenter view.
Yeah, thank you. That's
Gonna
it.
work. Okay, yes, okay, there you go.
Much better, right? So like inside of the methods, not only have I taken that process or that approach to the name of the method, but also the body of the tests, I also follow that convention, right? And I follow the given one then, the gherkin language to write tests. So here you look on the far left, I have unit tests or integration tests for the backend stuff. So in this case, it's C# code. It reads like that. The thing in the middle, those are unit tests or integration tests for the front end, right? This is written in JavaScript. Actually, this one is a TypeScript, but it's the same thing really. Look at the body, given when then. On the far right, those are end-to-end tests written in Cypress.io using TypeScript in this case, and look at the body, right? And then when I show this to folks, they say, oh, but why don't you use a tool like SpecFlow or Cucumber, where you can just use plain text, right? That will internally, the tool will essentially map those steps from English to something else. And my point is, if you do have people who are going to be writing those stories, those acceptance criteria in plain English, and they are going to be using those tools, yes, just have them go at it. If they are not going to be the people writing and or maintaining those, I gave up on just using Cucumber and those things. Because as a developer, that's just an extra thing that I need to maintain.
Yeah.
Okay, so I said, okay, as long as developers are writing and maintaining the gherkin, we're going to use whatever tool the team feels more productive. So for things like this, I don't mind that I have the underscores because I can still read just like, playing on English. And the way, like, notice that all these guys are wrapped in this acceptance criteria, method or function. Actually, I've renamed that since to scenario, where, and notice that I'm passing the functions in. So that acceptance criteria here in this case, it strips out those underscores and it reports the plain string, right? The plain text. If I want to produce a report to show it to BAs who want to review the assumptions or the criteria that they're going with, right? So, and then I also have like some little tools where if I have the sentences, say in Azure Board or whatever system you're using that you have your gherkins in plain old English, I have some little add-ons where I can copy that and paste it, and it will do the underscores for me, right? Really then just use whatever tool is gonna make it the most productive for people writing, maintaining, and reading that information. So I focus, again, if it's mostly the developers working with that, just make it as productive to the developer as possible, right? Cool. All right, folks who have questions, please keep dropping the questions in, and then Jim will relay questions.
Absolutely.
Thank you. All right, so from that, as I started like rethinking the way I'm writing my tests to make them more expressive, I said, okay, next step is gonna be, how are we writing our user stories, right? Because our tests should reflect the acceptance criteria. Oh, but what if they are, technical things? I still want to describe them in given one then. Given a text file, when I'm parsing into JSON, then it should have the proper format or whatever, right? I still think along those lines as opposed to arrange extra sorts. Like, no, given one then, we're always given something, there's always something happening, and there is something you want to observe out of it, right? So I said, okay, now that I'm writing my test based on the acceptance criteria is created off of user stories. Okay, let's look at how we're writing user stories. And then we see stories, again, going back to the training wheels of things. This is the training wheels for user stories, right? As A, I want to, so that. And people will just go with that template and run with it. And they will run stories like the one that you're seeing here. As the system, like, wait, as the system. It should be like as the, some sort of user, some sort of role, system. That's kind of odd. I want to remove duplicate entries from my address database tables so I don't have duplicates. What's the problem with having duplicates? Oh, that, you have to create a normalized, database, relational database. You cannot have duplicates. Like, why does that matter? Right? I mean, from this, I cannot infer what is the value of this user story. Right? That's the other thing. A user story should, as you read it, it should tell you how are the people who are paying you to write software, how is this user story either making money to them or preventing them from losing money, or add, if it's a nonprofit, whatever value is. How is that user story, helping out other people, more people, right? So you have to think that. And then we look at a story like this, maybe they do want to have a duplicate to, for performance optimization, right? Maybe you have, a million joins there that when you're reading that data, no, just give me a denormalized version of that data because I need to serve that up as quickly as possible. But that's just me thinking, why is it that it's important? Why is it important that it's the address database tables? It can't be a CSV file on disk, or can it be up in the cloud? It makes absolutely no sense. It's a technical thing that has no place as a user story. Now, what if it was written like this? As the marketing manager, I want to send direct mail with no duplicate addresses so that I save on mailing costs of marketing initiatives. Does that seem like something valuable to somebody? Right? I would say that a business would be looking at that. Oh yeah, you're saving, on costs for doing some things. Yeah, that is important, right? That is a much better user story. It has nothing technical about it, right? Whether you have tables or columns or databases, or it does not matter, right? What matters is what's written. Now, even though that's a better story, what is the most important part of this story, of any story? There are 3 sentences here. Which one is the most important in the story?
Value statement.
The value statement, right? It's the so that part. Why do we make it the last sentence? Are we building suspense here, right? In a world where the marketing managers, right, just start with the most important thing. The whole, like the Simon Sinek book, start with why. Start with why. Start with the so that. That's the single most important part of a user story. Everything else is just there to support the value stated at the last sentence. So flip it around. Start with that, right? And that's something that I picked up from Cucumber.
Yeah.
12 years ago when I was doing Rails.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter what order you write those statements in. You can put the so that at the very beginning, and then the rest of it towards the end.
Yeah, and the big point that I make out of it is that far too often I've sat in sprint planning sessions where people spend most of the time talking as a user, because usually they don't go like, what kind of user? What's the role of that user? Why does that type of person care about this? It's as the user. It's a website. It's a user. I want to, and then they spend like, in a 2-hour meeting, they spend 45 minutes just talking about what they want. And then so that they go, so that it's like, it's brushed over. It's like is that even a full sentence? I've seen like so many user stories like that. So once I've gone with this format, it's like, okay, this is how we start a user story. in order to finish that sentence. If you cannot finish that sentence, we should not be writing any code. Because if you cannot find the words in English to finish one sentence, there is no Java, there's no TypeScript, there's no Ruby, there's no programming language that's going to give you the value you're looking for. Right? Walk up to a board and finish one sentence. That's all you need. So if we are to be in a sprint planning session, spending time to talk about the user story, let's focus on talking about that first sentence until everybody in the room understands that. Like, oh, I get why that's important. Okay, let's do this. All right. To whom does this actually matter? Marketing managers, salespeople, buyers. Okay, all right. I want to. Okay, that's how you want to see that behavior or that feature come to fruition, right? And I've run recently into this idea of having the business people focus on the in order to part and have the delivery team focus on the I want to. Let the development team, the delivery team, play around with maybe 3 or 4 options for that I want to. It's like, hey, what if we do it this way, or this way, or this way, or this way? And have the conversation with the business, because most of the time when the business says, I want to, they are just giving us hard requirements based on their interpretation of what would be a good way to deliver them. Not giving room to the development team to actually come up with solutions to the problem, right? Huge concept there. So getting developers, and that's the other thing, right? Us developers, we're very good at saying, oh yeah, the code is not great or the feature's not done because the requirements suck. Oh, do they? Can you write the user story, right? If you were the one writing the user story, can you do it? How would you write that user story? What would make that user story not suck, right? Because you know what sucks for you as a developer. Write a freaking user story so that we can learn from you, right? And I kid you not, once I started like having this kind of like critical thinking, I started saying, okay, let me try writing this. English is not even my primary language, but let me give it a go, right? And you start running that by the business folks, you're like, huh, yeah, the way you wrote the I want to, I didn't even thought that was possible. Now that I do, hold on, let's talk about this, right? They become open to that as long as we can articulate the thoughts. It's like, okay, this is where our like problem-solving minds is going about this. Let's make sure that we understand what's of value. What is it that you're trying to accomplish as a business, and let us help you out with from the technology front, right? Huge difference that makes, right? So take ownership of that. Developers who think that their requirements suck, try doing it yourself, right? But have the conversation. That's what's important. From there, it's like, okay, once we have good user stories that describe the value that we are trying to bring into the business, what's the acceptance criteria, right? I'm a huge advocate of the whole give and when then, because it sets this framework that makes you think about what are you given? What is the current state of the world at that specific point in time? That's the most important thing. It's oh, this is a God type of user who can do everything. So he's given everything. It's like, yes, the users who have all of the permissions on any kind of software, never ever do they want to sit behind the computer and activate all of their powers, right? There's one thing that they want to do. There's one task, one very distinct task that they want to do. Okay, for that task, what are we given? Oh, they have a credit card number. They have, their fingerprints. They have something that they know. They have a customer on the phone that they're trying to work with. The customer happens to have the number of a sales order that they are calling about. Those are your givens. So it's not like, oh, I just need access to all of our sales orders. No, that's not what you want. Well, but that's what the user story says. I want to see all of my sales orders. No, tell me more. Well, my customers are calling every day. Oh, customers. Yeah, and they're calling because they misplaced an order or whatever. Okay, what's the number of that? Right, you start having these conversations, you start framing and understanding at that specific point in time for that problem that the user is trying to solve. This is what you're given. Not the world, not all of the superpowers. This, right? Start from there. And then for like the user story that we were looking at before, this is a typical case. Given that the current user is a marketing manager and duplicate addresses exist, when sending direct mail, then only unique addresses get mail, right? There's nothing technical about this story. This is something else for the behavior-driven, the BDD style tests. I don't want to see any technical things like when the user clicks on the button. No, there's no button.
Too brittle.
Right? Too brittle because today is a button, tomorrow is voice activated. Then what? Now you have to change your story? No, the behavior is still the same. The value is still the same, right? What changes the UI control or the way to activate that thing?
You focus on business value.
Right? Focus on what the people have at the forefront of their mind. Nobody's gonna call up a pizza place and say, hey, I just placed an order 10 minutes ago. Can I delete that order? Can I delete that order? Right? So when I see a user story that says, I want to delete, I say, no, you don't. Oh, we're not selling that product anymore. Oh, do you want to delete the product or do you want to discontinue the product? Right? It's like, the way we use the language, us developers, we are all at fault because we've made people think in those terms, right? Deleting, canceling.
Cancel culture.
What was that?
Cancel culture.
Right? It's pretty bad. It's like, no, let's revoke that.
Deplatformed.
Right? The other one that's one of my favorites is you see a partial list of something and there's a button that reads load more. Do you really think that the user is looking at a partial list and they're thinking, oh, I want to load more? That's a developer's thing, thinking, oh, I need to load more data so that the user can see more.
Yeah.
There's language, natural language for that. So I've gotten like user stories and mock-ups from UX designers with these kind of things like delete, load more. And as a developer, I've had this conversation with them saying, no, that's not what you want. Oh, but the user story says that. I said, yeah, but the user story is wrong. I'm sorry to say. That's not what the business and your people, your stakeholders actually want. Right? So, but yeah, all of that came from my learning unit tests at some point and then writing unit tests that sucked and then refining those and then learning about CDD and BDD and domain-driven design. It's like, started making more sense, right? And the people that we interact with, even more so the non-technical, they really value this kind of stuff. But it's like, oh, now I have this.
You're speaking my language.
You're speaking my language. Like, oh, you actually speak English at the end of the day, right? So very important. So very simple illustration of that. That initial test that I show here, that I found in the wild, when I went into that client, they were having problems because they took a intro to unit testing, or was it? No, it was an intro to TDD class. So they started writing a whole bunch of tests. And then they had when I went in, they had maybe 400 controllers that were being tested by 400 test files. Each file had at least 40 tests, right, for the different actions in their controllers. And their problem was, hey, Claudio, our tests have become, are we having connectivity issues there?
Maybe. I'm not sure.
Where's the, still here? Oh, there we go. We're back. Hello, folks online.
Okay, Scott's typing.
Okay.
Good. Scott did ask, what approach do you use to add tests to an existing system that doesn't have any tests?
Thanks, Scott, for the question. I get that ask a lot. I also think I have a blog post on that, like deciding on what to test or something like that. Usually my approach is I will ask the business, not the software developers, because as developers, we always have our minds like kind of messed up. It's like, oh, I want to test.
I'm gonna I need to, if you want me to test, you need to tell me what's the most valuable to test this.
So that's the thing. I talk to the business and I ask, okay, out of the system that you have, what is the number one feature that if it's not working, you're gonna lose money?
Yeah.
Right? They're gonna say, oh, it's the X thing. That is where I would start putting tests on. And as it turns out, that feature is usually the hardest feature to test. It's usually that feature that you look at the classes, they have like 10,000 lines of code and cyclomatic complexity is through the roof. And yes, right? So I would start with that. I would start writing a big fat integration test that it's like, I just need one clean path through that code. Like I don't even put the assertions there. It's like, okay, I just need to figure out how do I instantiate that class? What do I need to pass in? And then I keep running until it stops throwing exceptions. It's like, okay, now that it's running, let me write the assertions to figure out, okay, given what's there now and the following parameters, this is the output. Whether it's wrong or right, I have no idea. This is just how it currently works. So I have that in place. All right, now let me start refactoring that to make sure that I don't break what's currently there, right? Or learn or get some understanding, and then start refactoring into, okay, that gigantic, piece of code. As I refactoring to it, I start identifying what are the different contexts under which we are exercising that feature, right? But that gets into context-based testing, which is a whole other separate talk that I have that I can totally offer at another
Thank
meeting.
you.
Absolutely. So that's a spot where I would start. Always from like, what is the single most important thing that brings value or that prevents the business from losing value? Start with that, and then hopefully for any new code, start testing a new code, right? Start experimenting with testing a new code. So in this example here, when I walked into that client, they said, yeah, we have all these tests, like 400 tests, but they're very brittle right now. They're very hard to maintain. Well, guess what? Because they were copying, pasting, copy, paste. And then anytime they made a small change to one of their controllers, it would break all the tests. And then what happens? They stop maintaining the tests, right? At which point you think, well, but isn't one of the main purposes of testing to be able to do refactoring in an easier manner? Like, well, yeah, but if the tests now become the bottleneck where people cannot read and understand the test, they're going to stop doing it, right? But it's like, well, but the change requirements, all I need to do to implement it is to go in the code and put a if block there. That's all it takes. But then you go to the test, it's like, well, I'm seeing a whole bunch of tests. This one looks like it seems to be the one that I can copy, paste, and then just change some stuff. I go for that one line change, you have, 100 new lines of code in test. That's where the business starts saying, no, we cannot afford testing. If that's what it takes 4 hours to write tests for a one line change, we cannot afford that. That's where you lose people. That's where you lose developers who are not going to be writing the tests. And that's where you lose the business saying, don't do that. Don't spend time on that. We don't have budget for that, right? So you want to make tests easier to read and write. So when I get into a code base like that, I start refactoring the tests. And in that case, what I end up with was something like this. It's still the same test, right? But you can read, well, given user exists in the data store, given a successful service response, when calling post with a DS key, which is their data security key, something that makes sense to them. Substitute, that's something that I left off there because I didn't finish this one bit for the sample here. Then the result should indicate, okay, response with whatever, right? That's what that test is actually doing. That whole business with the what is it? Portfolio service configure those parameters returning true. What that really meant, given the user existing the data store. That's what that thing means. But as I did the refactoring with those guys, I saw that block of mocks and I said, I have no idea what that is. I extracted that into a separate method and I named given spelled just like that, right? And I did a lot of this, given, when, then, right? So that I could see like 4 lines of code as opposed to 100. And then I would ask one of the developers on the team, say, hey, can you do a code review? They would go to us like, what the heck do these methods mean? I said, you tell me, right? I said, that's what I had in my mind when I read the original code. It's like, there are stubs that I don't understand. There are mocks that I don't understand. There are actions that I'm not quite following. You guys tell me. And then through that conversation, oh no, that first thing there is just to make sure that the user exists in the data store. Ah, okay, let's encompass that here. And then guess what? That one method, given user existing data store, now we just reuse every place else, right? And if we need the case where given user does not exist, right? Given the user does not exist in the data store, which would be a false in that stub, we just had another method. Given user does not, capital letters, exist in the data store, right? Now they want to write more tests for that same feature. There is very little and a collection of steps that they can just reuse, making the new tests easier to write. Writing the test in this manner also has made me understand their current implementation of their controllers and also provide suggestions on how they were writing things, because it exposed how they were using dependency injection in a bad manner, where the dependencies being injected, they were not ready to be used until that configure method was called. Well, if you pass in a dependency that's not ready to be consumed, that's a problem. Well, but we don't know information about the user until we are like in the middle of that body. It's like, okay, it's a deferred execution that you're looking for. Instead of injecting a dependency, inject a factory that will wait until you call a method and saying, hey, give me an instance of this thing, and these are the parameters that I didn't have when you constructed the controller. But now I do here, right? But all those things didn't came to fruition until I actually reshaped the test. What are we working with, right? Two beings. So going from AAA, arrange active sort, to given when then, I started this little movement, no given when then, no code. I threw that out there in at a conference years ago, and a lady who was in attendance, she actually made some stickers, no GWT, no code, and then she sent it and said, yes, I love it. And why do I raise a big stink about that? Well, if we don't have given when thens, chances are we don't have good requirements or enough requirements, or we don't understand what we were given, right? So if you look at the requirements, like as a developer, you may just see requirements that say, you know, demonstrate that it does this, that, or the other. Then if you, as a developer, writing those tests, you start given, what are we given? Well, go talk to somebody who can tell you that. Do not write any code. You don't know what you're building. You have no idea what you're building, right? Writing English is way easier than writing any kind of programming, period. It's way cheaper. You can do it on a piece of paper. You can do verbally. You can walk up to a board and do it, right? You don't need any IDE for that. So focus on that. Once you got those things in place, the conversation, but remember, user story, the way we learn through Agile practices and Scrum trainings and all that. User story is a placeholder for conversation. You're picking a user story off the board and start working on it without talking to anybody? Wait. Step back. have a conversation. Those are not, even though I need to even reword here, they are not really requirements, right? They are bits of information that you have to have a conversation to understand where people are going with that. Why is that important? Some other things that came from these practices are, this is a very typical anti-pattern that I see, right? You learn about your, act or arrange, act, assert, and then the assertions are just like copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste like that. And then you have to read through the whole thing. Assert is true, meat lover, pizza, toppings, any topping goes into topping, name equals blah, right? And then the only thing that changes is that like on the far right of those lines, everything else is just a repetition, except when it's not, right? Because again, sometimes you may just have an exclamation mark negating the whole thing and you miss that because everything looks the same. A very easy way to refactor test like that is to create a little method, like in C# we have extension methods, which you add to a class without having to change the class itself. Is there anything similar in Java these days?
Add what?
It's like a mix-in type of thing.
I don't think so.
That's a bummer.
Yeah, I mean, we have lambdas where you can earn. So what I've done before is in a test is take and extend the class and override the behavior of a method in the class. So
Decorator pattern.
yeah, basically
Okay.
decorating it. Yeah.
Okay, so that's fine, provided that the class is not static.
or final.
Not static,
Final.
abstract or static, right?
Final, yeah, particularly.
Final, yes.
Yeah.
Then you can do that, yeah. But the main point is, and I know that in the Java space, there's a lot of like internal DSLs that people create to essentially use in tests, because this is what I tend to create in my projects is internal DSLs that have the words used by the business, right? Because the business does not say, assert are equal, assert is true, assert contains. The business does not say that. The business, like in this case, a pizza place will say, hey, my meat lover pizza should have toppings XYZ. Right?
So Scott asked in the chat, how do developers justify cleaning up messy sets of tests without having to call in an external consultant?
Yeah, if you don't call in.
Threaten the revenue.
Right.
If we don't get this tested, serious bad stuff could happen, and you could see $1 million walk out that door.
Yeah, I have I know that in the past, to me it was a huge struggle to go with have people buy into the practice, because people would say, oh, we don't have time for that. I said, well, you're telling me you don't have time to test. Wait a minute. Like, oh, no, we have to test it. Okay, so let's think about it for a moment. Software developers, we are writing software to automate other people's lives, right? Automate their jobs and, make their lives better. Testing the code we write is part of our job. Shouldn't we automate our work the same way? Who's keeping tab of that? So I've been in things in the past where when the team was not allowed, quote unquote, to put time into automated tests, I said, okay, let's start tracking how much time we're spending on that long feedback cycle between writing a feature, making changes, trying to fix a bug, waiting for things to compile, starting everything up, connecting to the blah, blah, blah. Keep track of all that time spent. Let's put that together and present that to the business and say, okay, doing manual tests, this is how much time we were spending. Multiply that by our hourly rates, right? And then let's make a case. If those were automated tests, this is by how much we would reduce that feedback cycle and the quality of the product that we are producing and all that. Back in the day, it was in the teams that I've worked on, it was essentially me just doing it, regardless as to whether those around me are doing it or not. It's one of those, well, it's not because you don't wash your hands that I'm not gonna do. Like, That's how my mom taught me, and that's how I'm gonna do it. Either you want it or you don't, or you like it or not. I don't care. It's just something I do. Okay, it's the way I perform my skill. Does take time. You have to take the lead on it, and this is how it has worked for me. Just pushing the envelope and saying I'm doing it anyway, even if I have to do it on my own, practicing. So, because once you've done that a million times, it becomes very easy to apply these refactorings to tests. I start seeing code that look like this, like refactor, extract method, extract variable, extract interface, pull member up. You start going through those refactors, it happens very fast, but only because I've done it a million times.
And because you have tests in place.
Right? So it starts like that. When you can justify, and this has worked well in teams where they recognize that, hey, the testing seems to be yielding some value, but now we're running into these challenges where the tests are brittle, or we change one little thing here and now 300 tests are broken. What's happening? What are we doing wrong? That's when it's good for a consultant to come in and quickly go and say, oh, this is probably what's happened. A client many years ago that I went to, I remember I first asked them, okay, do you guys have automated tests? It was a large solution. They said, yes, we do. I said, oh, that's great. How many tests in your suite? Oh, about like 5,000 tests. Oh, that's great. How often do you run it? Like, well, right now we're only running it on our nightly build. Like, okay, only in the nightly build. So, yeah, sometimes they have problems. Like, what kind of problem? Well, we're only running them the nightly build because they take some time to run. Some time, like what? Like 4 to 5 hours. I said, okay, what you have, and because I asked them, do you guys have unit tests specifically? And then they started all this talk. I said, okay, what you have are integration tests. Fine, they're useful, but not in this case. Like if you need to wait 24 hours for the thing to start running, right? And then looking at their code, I said, I can quickly identify why they're taking long. Well, they had tests to verify if the value of a property was greater than 0 or not. And to run such a test, all it took was to change the connection string to the database. Because in order to test that, they had to instantiate a business entity that would go to the database to figure out the structure of the data, to populate an entity so that they could change the value and say, hey, do you accept a value greater than 0 or not? So then it got me teaching them, okay, let's refactor that, where you create validators and you create tests that are really unit tests that you only validate the validator, and then you make sure that your unit entity uses that validator, but you don't have to run through database connections and stuff like that. But it really takes either some person taking the lead on that for years, learning those practices, or you get somebody from the outside who has been there, who has done that a million times and can quickly go and say, here, here, and here. This is what you need to learn and practice. I'm not going to solve your problems. I'm going to show you how you can do it because you have 5,000 tests. You've got some work cut out to you. The deal. See here, big realization, better tests, better code, better collaboration with people. Thinking English first was a huge thing in my mind because I come from, like I started software development 30 years ago with DBase and then old FoxPro and then Visual FoxPro. So I was very much a database guy, right? I would sit in a business meeting with people. People would say, oh, we have customers who place orders of products. In my mind, I'm thinking customer table, first name, last name, middle name, or just full name. What are we doing there? Orders, one too many, products, many too many. It's like, that's where my mind would go. It's the database first. It took me a long time to go from that to a code first approach. And then it took me just as long to go from that to, dude, English first. That's the language that we're speaking between normal people, right? Let's use that before you talk about the other stuff. So I oftentimes joke when I get like project managers or product owners or business analysts who walk up to me and they say, hey, Claudio, how can I get more productivity out of my development team? What language should I learn? Like T-SQL, I know how to run some queries and write some T-SQL. Like the language that then you should probably learn better is English. I kid you not, that's what I say. It's like, what do your user stories look like? Let me see.
And use precise language too.
Use precise language. It's not Shakespearean language. Brazilian dude here does not read Shakespeare well. I don't understand, a third of what the guy was saying, right? It has to be like terse, precise, just enough words to get the meaning across. Don't get, too, elaborate. It's just, you just need to plant an image into somebody else's mind, right? So like the product owner is the captain of the ship. They have a vision. Make sure that your team can actually have that same vision. It's not just on your mind, it's on the team's mind. Once it's on their mind, now they can do problem solving, they can offer solutions to your problem. Till then, there's only so much they can do. Instead of thinking of tests as tests, think of them as specifications, right, for the behavior that you're trying to build. Have developers, QA, BA, POs together as a happy family, right? Get everybody involved because like in Scrum terms, developers are not only the people writing the code that goes in production. The QA guys are also developers. The UX designers are also developers. We're all developing the same solution to a business. A QA guy may be writing automated tests. The guys writing the implementation code, they should be doing at least some level of manual tests of the stuff that they're producing. We're all developers. We need to communicate better.
In BDD, it's highly encouraged that you have conversations frequently between BAs, software developers, and QA folks to make sure that everything makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's where, right there. That's why I have that board. I've given this talk at places where I remember this time in Dallas, like these two ladies sitting at the back, they said, oh, I'm loving this talk. And then they said, we are QA professionals at our client, and that's precisely what we are doing. We write the give and when thens together with the PO. So the PO gives us a gist of, okay, this is the user story, this is where we're going with this. The QA ladies will go like, okay, what are our scenarios? The give and when thens, let's spell them out. We have a clear picture. Okay, now let's bring it to the guys who are going to write and the others who are going to be writing the code. Beautiful, right? That's beautiful. Most teams that I've worked on, though, they were not practiced into that. But as a developer writing the code, that's how I write my tests. So then when I asked other people to do a code review, not necessarily do I ask another programmer to do a code review. I ask my QA person, hey, can you review this pull request for me? Start with the tests. Validate my assumptions there. Show that to the business analyst, to the product owner. Say, hey, can you read this? Oh, I don't read C#. Oh, try this one. Oh, yeah, I can actually read that. That looks like English to me. Great, let's have a conversation, right? People appreciate that. Once the people who are writing the user stories, they start seeing the developers incorporating the conversation into code, they're like, oh, this thing that you're, do more. It's not like, oh, no, don't do this test thing. It's like that, whatever it is that you're doing, you're speaking our language. I can see that you're bringing our conversation into your daily work. Do more of it, right? So that grows over time. One of my go-to techniques when I go into a team that doesn't have those practices, like, okay, I'm assigned a user story. I'm going to go to the board. I'm going to pick the user story. Okay, in order to, I want, I want to, what's the acceptance criteria? Well, it says, demonstrate that it does this, demonstrate that it does that. Oh, okay, great. Let me walk over to our QA person and say, hey, can we pair on this for like an hour or so? Sure, how can I help you? Because usually they expect developers to push the code like towards the end of the sprint, and then QA has to like hustle to get, things tested.
That's no fair to them.
It's no fair at all. that's the least optimal way to do
Like,
it.
they're treated like an afterthought.
Yeah, so that's the kind of stuff that I started doing years ago. It's like, hey, can we pair day one into the sprint? Can we pair this for now? Sure, I don't know how I'm gonna help you. There's nothing written yet.
More than you can imagine.
So then I say, how are you gonna be testing this? When I tell you that I'm done, what are you gonna do to test this? Well, I need to make sure that I have a customer in the system and I have a product in this category and that we have 10 in stock because when we purchase 5, the stock should be down by 5. Okay, all right. And then I start writing out. Given product and there are 10 units in stock. When a user places an order, when a customer places an order, then the inventory levels go down by this. Does this reflect how we're going to be testing the system? Yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you. That's my test. Over time, I get them to write my C# test, for example. If I'm writing those C# tests, oh, but are they implementing the test? No. They're just writing that given and then, given and then. Great. Hey, Mom, I'm writing already tests, right? Not through the whole thing, but they are helping from day one. Because then, midway through the sprints, whenever I say I'm done with the story, it comes with no surprise to them because we've discussed what we're building, right? It makes sense from the get-go. People feel more empowered, right? Nobody feels like they're, going like crazy through the sprint to get things done because there was this early cooperation. Woo, that was a mouthful.
So one other thing I should mention, among all this, you talked about code coverage.
Yes.
Something on top of code coverage is mutation testing, mutation coverage. That's worth mentioning.
Yes.
It's basically testing your tests to make sure that your tests are actually effective. Which it's a very valuable tool to identify the holes basically in your tests and where you're. So you can say, hey, look, we have some fragile production code here. Yes, it might be covered, but it's not covered effectively enough.
There's an actual tool that helps
Yes,
with that?
yes. PyTest. PITEST.org is the website. There's versions for .NET that are available, and for JavaScript, and I think for Ruby. I'm not sure what all the other languages offhand. I can't remember, but there are a number of options available for the different languages that correlate to the same idea.
Yeah, and again, I wouldn't think that is the kind of thing that you would apply to the entire code base.
No.
Look at the things that yield the most value.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Certainly.
Okay. There's like the top of the pyramid. Like this is the gold.
Yeah. I don't
It's
care
all
about
the
getter
things that you
centers.
have wrong.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. And you can, at least with PyTest, you can say, okay, don't include these
Right.
particular methods, but all the others, yeah.
Yeah.
Or packages even.
Right. Yeah. That's something that's when people ask me about code coverage, I say, okay, I don't really care much about code coverage unless I'm like writing stuff for legacy and I'm trying to figure stuff out. What I do care about is feature coverage.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And
so,
that's what this does.
yeah, it's feature coverage, right? And following this, like in my current project, I haven't looked at our actual code coverage numbers, like until maybe a full year into it, when I decided, oh, let me see if my words actually have any weight here. And yeah, I ran the code coverage tools, and we had like 92%, 93% code coverage. And the parts that were not covered, like, I don't even care that those things are not covered. Honestly, it's like, I don't care. Because I know that for every single feature, we have coverage, because that's part of our process, right? As part of the user story, we write our given one-dens as a team, right? The whole team contributes to that. We all write our tests, where they go, whether they are, and we have at least one happy path end-to-end test to exercise the user's workflow for that feature. And then from there, we have integration tests and unit tests on the front end and on the back end. It's like, I know the feature is covered. Like how much of it?
And then with the integration tests, you test a happy path. Make sure it's not going to blow up on you.
Exactly. And then from there, it's like the whole pyramid, right? At the very top of the pyramid,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly, our numbers, it's that about 4% of our tests are end-to-end tests, right? About 8% are integration tests, everything else unit tests.
Nice.
It's been keeping, like I've tracked that for the last year and a half or so, and the test numbers go up, but the percentage stays like very close. It's like, okay, that's a perfect pyramid as far as I can tell.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, Claudio.
Thank you all very much for attending. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks. Jim signing off.